Picture this. It's the summer of 1859. No buzzing phones, no glowing screens, no satellites floating above your head. The world is quiet in a way we can't even imagine anymore. City streets glow under soft gas lamps. Horse-drawn carriages clatter over stone roads. Nights are dark, really dark. The kind of dark where the stars don't compete with anything man-made. The most advanced tech on Earth is the telegraph. Thin metal wires stretched across continents, carrying dots and dashes faster than any human could ride. People think they've finally tamed distance. They have no idea what's coming. Because while Earth is sleeping comfortably under its fragile sense of control, the sun, 93 million miles away, is about to snap. And when it does, the sky will catch fire. On the morning of September 1st, 1859, the sun looks normal to everyone else. Farmers go about their work. Shopkeepers unlock doors. Kids run barefoot through dusty streets. No one senses danger, except one man. Richard Carrington isn't famous. He isn't rich. He's not even a professional astronomer by today's standards. Just a curious, stubborn guy obsessed with sunspots. He spends his days staring at the sun through a telescope in a small private observatory in England, sketching what he sees by hand. That morning, Carrington is doing exactly that, tracking a cluster of dark sunspots, when suddenly the sun explodes. Not metaphorically, not kind of. It detonates. A blinding white flash erupts from the surface of the sun, brighter than anything Carrington has ever seen. It looks like two massive patches of light tearing across the solar surface, as if the sun itself has cracked open. Carrington jerks back in shock, thinking his telescope malfunctioned or his eyes betrayed him. But when he looks again, it's still there. The flare burns for several minutes, raw and violent, like a cosmic gunshot fired straight into space. Carrington's hands shake. He scribbles notes furiously, heart pounding. He doesn't know it yet, but he has just witnessed the first recorded solar flare in human history. What he can't see is the real threat. Because that solar blast isn't done. It has launched something far worse. 17 hours later. That's all it takes. A massive cloud of superheated plasma, billions of tons of solar matter, slams into Earth at unimaginable speed. Faster than anyone thought possible. Faster than science believed. Earth's magnetic shield takes the hit, and it buckles. Invisible lines of magnetism twist, snap, and surge. Energy floods into the atmosphere. The planet's defenses are overwhelmed. And suddenly the night sky ignites. In Boston, people spill out of taverns, confused and half-drunk, staring upward. The sky is glowing red. Not sunset red, not fire red, blood red. Green ribbons slash across the darkness. Purple arcs ripple overhead. The heavens move, pulse, breathe. It's so bright people can read newspapers at midnight without a single lamp. Some laugh nervously. Others start praying immediately. In New York, crowds gather in the streets. Church bells ring non-stop. Preachers scream about Judgment Day. Men drop to their knees. Women clutch their children. They think the world is ending. And honestly, you can't blame them, because this isn't just happening in one city. It's happening everywhere. In Cuba, sailors think distant cities are on fire and rush to prepare for battle. In California, miners wake up thinking it's morning and start cooking breakfast. In the Rocky Mountains, gold prospectors swear the sky looks like it's bleeding. In Rome, Madrid, and Paris, people watch the heavens burn in disbelief. In Hawaii, thousands of miles from the poles, the aurora dances overhead. The entire planet is lit up. No borders, no safe zones, just Earth getting hit. But the real chaos starts where humans thought they were smartest, the telegraph lines. Those proud metal veins stretching across nations suddenly come alive. Operators across America and Europe report the same thing. Sparks flying from keys, wires glowing hot, machines sending messages on their own. In some offices, telegraph paper bursts into flames. In others, operators are thrown from their chairs by electric shocks. Some discover they can send messages with the batteries disconnected, powered only by the storm itself. The sun is running the machines now, and no one is in control. Messages come through garbled, twisted, unreadable. Some claim the machines spell out eerie words without human input. Most chalk it up to panic and fried equipment. But deep down, everyone feels the same thing. This isn't a normal storm. This is something bigger. Back in England, Carrington steps outside and freezes. The sky is alive. Colors roll like waves across the darkness, casting strange shadows across the countryside. Neighbors gather, whispering, crying, demanding answers. Carrington knows that flare, that explosion he saw, it did this. The sun reached out and touched Earth. And for the first time in history, humanity realizes something terrifying. We are not as protected as we thought. By morning, the lights fade. The sky returns to normal. The world exhales. But the damage is done. Telegraph systems are wrecked. Scientists are stunned. Newspapers explode with headlines. Faith is shaken. Curiosity ignited. Carrington publishes his observations. Other scientists begin connecting dots: sunspots, magnetism, Earth's atmosphere. A new truth slowly emerges. The sun isn't just a warm light in the sky. It's a loaded weapon. And in 1859, it fired a warning shot. One day, humanity will build power grids, satellites, and digital networks far more fragile than telegraph wires. And when the sun fires again, the consequences won't fade with the dawn. By sunrise on September 2nd, 1859, people hoped the nightmare was over. The sky looked normal again. Birds sang like nothing happened. Sunlight felt harmless. But underneath that calm, the world was still shaking. Because the storm hadn't just lit up the sky, it had broken the future. Inside telegraph offices across America and Europe, men walked in expecting routine work. What they found instead felt like stepping into a haunted house. Burned wires, melted insulation, charred desks, the sharp smell of ozone hanging in the air like smoke after a gunfight. In Boston, operators stared at their machines like they were ticking bombs. One man whispered, "I ain't touching that thing again." Another replied, "You don't touch it, it touches you," because the wires were still alive. Even hours after the auroras faded, currents surged unpredictably through the lines. Sparks snapped without warning. Some operators reported feeling a buzzing under their skin, like the air itself was charged. Telegraph companies shut down entire sections of the network, not out of caution, but fear. This had never happened before, not once. One story spread faster than any telegraph message. In Portland, Maine, two operators decided to experiment. They disconnected the batteries. Then they tried sending a message. It worked perfectly. No power source. Just the earth itself pushing electricity through the wire. They exchanged a few lines before one operator suddenly screamed, thrown backward by a shock that scorched his hand. The experiment ended immediately. The conclusion was clear. The planet was temporarily turned into a generator, and nobody knew how to turn it off. Scientists scrambled for explanations. Magnetism, atmospheric electricity, sunspots. Words were thrown around like guesses in the dark, but deep down there was an uncomfortable realization forming. Human technology had accidentally synced itself with something way bigger, and when that bigger thing moved, we felt it. Hard. Meanwhile, panic lingered in everyday life. In rural towns, rumors exploded. Some said the aurora was poison in the air. Others claimed it was a sign of war. More than a few believed God had sent a final warning. Churches stayed packed for days. Confession lines stretched around buildings. People paid old debts. Enemies made peace. Because when the sky looks like it's on fire, suddenly tomorrow doesn't feel guaranteed. Back in England, Richard Carrington barely slept. He replayed the moment of the solar flare again and again in his head. The brightness, the speed, the timing. He compared notes with other observers. One thing was undeniable. The flare and the storm were connected. This wasn't coincidence. It was cause and effect. Carrington realized something massive, something no one had ever truly grasped. The sun wasn't distant and irrelevant. It was active, violent, and Earth was directly in its line of fire. But here's the part no one talked about publicly. If the storm had hit just a little harder, telegraph operators might have died in large numbers. Entire cities could have burned. Infrastructure, primitive as it was, came terrifyingly close to collapse. And this was 1859, before power grids, before satellites, before digital dependence. Humanity had gotten lucky, and luck isn't a strategy. Newspapers milked the story. Headlines screamed about heavenly fires and the burning sky. Artists painted glowing heavens. Poets wrote verses about celestial wrath. Scientists argued in lecture halls while the public watched nervously from the sidelines. But after a few weeks, life moved on. Telegraph lines were repaired, machines were rebuilt, fear faded, the world shrugged because nothing else happened. No follow-up disaster, no immediate collapse. Just a strange story to tell future generations. A cosmic anomaly, a fluke, or so they thought. Because what most people didn't realize was this: the Carrington event wasn't rare. It was just the first time humans were advanced enough to notice it. Scientists digging into historical records later uncovered something chilling. Similar auroras were reported in 1770, again in 1730, again centuries earlier in ancient texts describing red skies and dragons of light. The sun had always been doing this. We just weren't wired enough to feel it. Until now. And as humanity marched forward, stringing more wires, building bigger systems, leaning harder on electricity, no one stopped to ask the obvious question: what happens when the sun does this again? Stronger, closer, smarter systems, bigger consequences. Carrington warned quietly in letters to colleagues. His concerns were politely acknowledged, then ignored, because planning for invisible threats doesn't sell until they hit. The night the sky caught fire faded into history, filed away as a curiosity, a freak event. But beneath that calm surface, a timer had started. One day the sun would fire again, and next time, humanity wouldn't just be watching the sky, it would be watching everything go dark. After the skies calmed down and the wires stopped biting back, the world did what it always does after surviving something terrifying. It forgot. Not immediately, but slowly, comfortably. People love a good scare, but only as long as it doesn't mess with daily life. And by late 1859, daily life was back. Telegraph lines were patched. Burned equipment was replaced. Newspapers moved on to politics and crime. The sky looked harmless again. So the danger must have passed, right? Richard Carrington didn't think so. While the rest of the world exhaled, he leaned forward, hard. He locked himself into calculations, charts, and letters. He cross-checked timings between the solar flare he saw and reports of auroras, electrical failures, and magnetic disturbances across the globe. The alignment was too clean to ignore. Same day, same hours, same sequence. Sun flare first, Earth chaos second. Carrington wasn't just staring at the past, he was staring at the future. And he didn't like what he saw. Here's the problem. In the 1800s, the sun wasn't seen as a threat. It was a life giver, a constant, a background character. Suggesting it could knock out human systems sounded dramatic, almost disrespectful to nature itself. So when Carrington presented his ideas to scientific circles, Reactions were mixed. Some nodded politely. Others straight up rolled their eyes. One astronomer reportedly said, "You're telling me the sun sneezed and the earth caught a cold?" Carrington didn't laugh, because that's exactly what happened. Across the Atlantic, physicists like Michael Faraday were piecing together similar conclusions. Magnetic fields weren't just theoretical anymore. They were active, dynamic, connected. Invisible lines of force stretched from the sun to Earth, and when those lines snapped or twisted, energy surged. Hard. Faraday warned that electricity wasn't just a tool, it was a relationship, and relationships can turn toxic fast. But here's where history took a wrong turn. Instead of slowing down, humanity sped up. The telegraph proved too useful to abandon. Railways expanded. Cities wired up faster. Every new mile of wire became another nerve ending, another vulnerability. And nobody was building shields. Governments didn't care. There was no immediate crisis, no bodies in the streets, no cities reduced to ash, so funding went elsewhere. Military, industry, expansion. Space weather wasn't even a phrase yet. It was just that weird thing that happened once. But the sun didn't care what humans believed. It kept moving. It kept pulsing. It kept building pressure beneath its surface like a loaded weapon. Scientists studying sunspots noticed cycles, roughly 11 years of rising and falling activity. Sometimes calm, sometimes aggressive, and sometimes explosive. The Carrington event wasn't random. It happened near a solar maximum, meaning the sun was already in a bad mood. That realization should have changed everything. It didn't. Meanwhile, quiet aftershocks rippled through society. Insurance companies quietly adjusted policies. Telegraph firms installed crude lightning arresters. Operators developed an unspoken rule: if the sky glows weird, shut it down. That fear never fully left. They joked about it during the day. But at night, they watched the heavens. Just in case. Decades passed. The world electrified itself. Light bulbs replaced gas lamps. Power stations replaced steam. Wires multiplied like veins across continents. What started as convenience became dependence. And still no one planned for the sun. By the early 1900s, a new belief took hold. Technology equals control. Humans had conquered distance, conquered darkness, conquered speed. Nature, it seemed, was finally on the back foot. The Carrington event faded into trivia. A footnote in astronomy textbooks. A cool anecdote, not a warning, until smaller storms started reminding us. In 1921, a geomagnetic storm knocked out telegraph systems again. Fires broke out. Rail signals failed. People panicked for a moment, then forgot again. In 1938, radio blackouts. In 1958, satellite disruptions. In 1972, near-miss solar storms during the Cold War. One strong enough that, if it hit Earth fully, could have triggered nuclear missile launches due to sensor confusion. Each time, humanity got lucky. Each time, the lesson was ignored. Carrington didn't live to see how right he was. He died in 1875, long before satellites, power grids, and global dependence on electricity. But his notes survived, and buried in them was a line that feels chilling today: "The sun may yet humble our machines." That wasn't poetry, it was prophecy. The night the sky caught fire wasn't the disaster, it was the demo, a free preview. A warning shot fired across a planet that wasn't ready to listen. Because the real danger wasn't 1859. The real danger was the day humanity forgot how fragile its systems really were. And that day was already here. So here's the deal. By the time the industrial age hit its stride, humans were wiring up the planet like it was a giant Christmas tree. Cities buzzed, trains hummed, and telegraphs tapped day and night. Electricity wasn't just a tool, it was life. But life, it had a weak spot. Remember that night in 1859, the Carrington Event? That was just the first act, a cosmic teaser, a trailer for the chaos that could drop anytime, anywhere. And by the 1870s and 1880s, the world had mostly shrugged it off. People moved on. They wanted convenience, light, speed. They didn't want to think about plasma clouds from a star 93 million miles away frying their newfangled gadgets. Meanwhile, back in the labs, a handful of nerds were quietly losing sleep. Harrington's journals had been copied, circulated in whispers and tucked into dusty tomes. Other astronomers started noticing patterns, sunspots popping, flares flashing. "Yo," they'd mutter in their own way, "the sun's acting up again. Maybe we shouldn't get too cozy with these wires." But industry? Nah, industry didn't care. Every blinking telegraph, every buzzing power line, every flickering streetlight was money. And money drowned out warnings better than any thunderstorm. Let's talk telegraph operators for a sec. These cats were street smart and fast on the keys. They knew when the auroras danced that something weird was going on, but nobody outside their office took it seriously. In Boston, Eliza Thorne's cousin Clara noticed sparks jumping off the keys one night. She yelped, "What the hell?" and her supervisor just laughed. "Static," he said, "always happens." Except it wasn't just static. It was the Earth's magnetic field screaming through metal wires, injecting millions of volts into human infrastructure like it was a live wire straight from the sun. Every line was a tiny trap, every telegraph a potential fire hazard. Meanwhile, the public, totally clueless. Street preachers called it the Lord's warning, women clutching rosaries, kids pointing at the sky, thinking the end had come. Newspapers ran short blurbs. "Aurora in New York, beautiful but harmless," one editor wrote. Harmless. Yeah, until your telegraph office catches fire and your farm iron glows blue in the dead of night. People got used to ignoring cosmic events the way they ignored thunderstorms. Loud, flashy, dramatic, but temporary. Here's the kicker. The sun didn't need permission to mess with humans. By the 1880s, telegraph lines stretched across continents, linked oceans via cables. These babies were perfect antennas for geomagnetic chaos. A storm like 1859. Bigger now. Much bigger. And it was coming. In rural Virginia, Samuel Grant had grown into a man obsessed with electricity. He'd spent his youth watching wires spark and children panic, thinking, man, if this happens on a bigger scale, we're toast. He started tinkering. Small lightning arresters for the farm, grounded wires, insulated circuits. Nobody cared. "Why you worrying?" his neighbors asked. "Sun ain't gonna fry us." Yeah, Sam thought, tell that to a billion-ton plasma cloud. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic in England, Harrington's notes became almost like forbidden scripture. People joked about the solar menace, wrote poems about it, but the scientific community didn't want to be alarmists. Science doesn't scare people, they said, except science should scare people sometimes. Like when the sky can literally rain electricity. The Carrington Event became the ghost everyone ignored. It was discussed in hushed tones at conferences, then buried under telegram manuals and textbooks about mundane topics. Even as electricity spread into homes, factories, and streets, no one seriously upgraded infrastructure to handle a direct hit. Meanwhile, sunspots were still popping, flares were still flashing. The sun didn't stop. It couldn't care less about human arrogance. Picture this, it's 1887. Boston. Telegraph office buzzing like always. The aurora creeps south. Operators start noticing weird signals again. Sparks jump, machines twitch. "Hey, this feels wrong," Eliza murmurs. Her supervisor nods. "Yeah, weird, but the boss says it's fine. Just ignore it." And that's the human story right there. Ignore danger until it hits like a hammer. Meanwhile, in England, Harrington's son, Richard Jr., reads his dad's old journals. He's fascinated. The man predicted it all. Plasma clouds, magnetic storms, machines fried, humans clueless, he mutters, and Richard Jr. dreams of a future where humanity won't be caught off guard. Satellites, modern grids, the works. But for now, it's the age of telegraphs, gas lamps, and horse-drawn carriages. One wrong sun sneeze, and the entire planet's infrastructure is toast. Back in Virginia, Samuel sets up a small experiment with a coil, some wire, and a grounding rod. Sparks fly. He gets a shock. He laughs nervously. "Okay, universe, I see you," he says. This is humanity's first real flirtation with the idea that electricity and the sun aren't just friends. They're frenemies with serious potential for betrayal. By the late 1880s, reports of auroras far south start popping up. South Carolina, Georgia, Florida. People call it pretty, mystical, romantic. Nobody connects it to potential destruction. Meanwhile, every new telegraph, every new wire, every new electrical machine is like stacking dominoes without realizing the wind could knock them all over. And the wind, it's solar, and it's patient. So that's where we stand at the end of part 4. The stage is set. The sun is ticking. Humanity is wired and vulnerable. Experts whisper warnings. Operators feel the sparks. Farmers get nervous, but nobody is ready. Because here's the real kicker. The first cosmic punch landed in 1859, a warning. Humanity shrugged. And the world is about to pay attention. One spark, one flare, one screaming aurora at a time. All right, buckle up, 'cause the night of cosmic chaos is about to get real. By the mid-1859s, the world had settled into its rhythm. Telegraphs clattering, factories pumping smoke, streets alive with horse hooves and lantern light. But underneath that hum of civilization, the sun had other plans. It wasn't just flaring, it was hungry. Plasma clouds, hotter than any furnace on Earth, were barreling toward the planet, ready to throw humanity's wired world into total madness. In Boston, Eliza Thorne was pulling another late-night shift at the telegraph office. The brass keys clacked like piano notes in a smoky jazz club. Normally, this would be routine, but tonight the air smelled weird. Ozone, like when lightning hits metal but stronger. "Man, something ain't right," muttered Whitaker, squinting at the buzzing wires. Sparks danced along the connections like little green fireflies gone rogue. Eliza leaned over the machine, fingers frozen in mid-tap. The telegraph paper started spitting messages on its own. Random letters, half-words, gibberish. But then a phrase she couldn't ignore appeared. Aurora, sky on fire, heaven screaming. She yanked her hands back. Holy what the hell, meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Harrington Jr. was flipping through his dad's old notes, eyes wide. Sunspots, magnetic storms, electrical chaos. He laughed nervously. Dad always said this was possible, but damn, I didn't think it'd hit this hard. In the streets below, gas lamps flickered violently. People paused, squinting. Some swore it looked like the sky itself was bleeding. Children pointed, shrieking. Adults muttered prayers, clutching what little faith they had left. The aurora wasn't just bright, it was insane. Reds, greens, purples twisting like ribbons, moving faster than anyone thought natural. It stretched from Boston to Philadelphia, across Europe, even into the Caribbean. Folks in Cuba were thinking their city was on fire. Sailors in the Pacific swore the gods were pissed. Back in Boston, the telegraph chaos hit a peak. Machines smoked, wires sparked, and operators got zapped like cartoon characters. Whitaker's eyebrows singed. Papers caught fire. Messages were scrambled into nonsense, or worse, messages that weren't supposed to exist. Eliza's mind raced. "We're running on solar juice," she whispered, eyes wide. "The sun, it's powering the machines and frying us." A young apprentice got thrown across the room from a jolt. Whitaker rushed over, slapping the kid on the back. "Welcome to the apocalypse, kid." The city was buzzing, not with electricity but panic. Street preachers climbed barrels, shouting, "The world's ending. Repent. The heavens are on fire." Out in Virginia, Samuel Grant was riding his horse through the countryside. Sparks were flying off the fences. The air was humming, like a million tiny violins tuned to the wrong key. His little sister Annie clung to his arm, eyes huge. "Is it the devil?" she stammered. "Nah, it's the sun being a jerk," Samuel muttered, though even he felt the hairs on his neck stand on end. He checked his homemade grounding rods. Didn't help much, but at least they kept the farm from catching fire. In Philly, telegraph lines literally went nuts. Sparks jumped across terminals. One operator, Old Man McGrew, yelled, "It's alive! The wires, they're alive!" And in New York, the story repeated itself. Machines typed messages on their own, smoke curling into the ceilings. People panicked in the streets. Lanterns flickered as the aurora bled through the city windows, casting eerie shadows on brick walls. Across the Atlantic, Harrington Jr. climbed to the roof of his house. He squinted at the sky, jaw dropping. The aurora stretched from horizon to horizon. He could see it over London, over the countryside, over the docks. It was like the planet had flipped on a neon switch. Neighbors gathered, some cheering, some praying. Harrington Jr. muttered, "If Dad were alive, he'd be losing his mind." The magnetic storm was so strong, compasses spun wildly. Ship captains at sea were helpless. Sailors in Boston Harbor whispered about the sky opening up, gods punishing them for some ancient crime. Meanwhile, Eliza Thorne had figured something out. The telegraphs weren't just random. They were acting as receivers for the sun's energy. Her fingers flew across the keys, tapping out messages, trying to warn operators elsewhere. "Listen," she told Whitaker, pointing at the machine. "If we route the power through the grounding rods, we can keep it from frying the offices completely." Whitaker nodded, eyes wide. "You're a genius, kid, or crazy, probably both." But even with their makeshift protections, fires erupted in Portland. Sparks ignited paper stacks in Washington, and in some offices, operators got burned. Humans were tiny ants dancing in a storm they couldn't see. In rural Virginia, Samuel rode into town to warn the mayor. Lanterns lit the streets. People were gawking, pointing at the sky like it was the 4th of July on steroids. "Mayor, stay clear of the wires," Samuel shouted. "Everything's live, it's the sun." The mayor blinked. "The sun? Kid, you've been reading too many science books." But when the mayor reached for the telegraph key, Sparks jumped, singeing his sleeve. His jaw dropped. Holy, kid's right. Meanwhile, the aurora reached a peak. In California, miners thought the mountains were on fire. In Melbourne, Australia, prisoners saw the southern lights twist above them, and guards swore the end times were nigh. Ships at sea mistook it for distant fires preparing cannons. Children across the world stayed awake, staring at the impossible colors. Even Monet, still a young kid, would have remembered this night. Imagine painting that sky, impossible beauty and terror intertwined. Back in Boston, the telegraphs were alive in ways humanity hadn't planned. Messages were sent without batteries, words typed on their own, sometimes warnings, sometimes nonsense. Operators screamed and ran, machines smoked, wires hissed. The city was alive with electricity it couldn't control. Eliza leaned back, hands shaking, heart racing. "If the sun ever hits harder, we're done for." Whitaker wiped sweat from his brow. "We're lucky it's just a warning this time." And that's the thing. It was a warning. The Carrington event didn't kill anyone directly, but it let humanity taste what the sun could do if it decided to throw a tantrum. As dawn crept in, the aurora faded. Streets glowed faintly, smoldering papers scattered. Telegraph offices were trashed, machines damaged, operators exhausted, but people were alive. Harrington Jr. scribbled in his journal, "We've seen the sun's fury. Next time, we may not be so lucky." Eliza sat in the wrecked telegraph office, tired but alive. She glanced at the paper, still humming from the storm's electricity. "We survived barely." Samuel Grant returned home. His little sister clung to him, eyes wide. "Is it over?" "Yeah," Samuel said, "over for now." And across the world, humanity took its first real glance at the power of a star, untouchable, unstoppable, and a force we'd better respect. Man, if you thought last night was wild, Part 6 is where the real chaos sets in. Dawn's creeping over the horizon, but the world ain't normal, far from it. The aurora faded, yeah, but the planet's wires and machines, they're fried like bacon in a skillet. People are stumbling out of their homes, blinking in daylight, trying to figure out what the hell just went down. In Boston, Eliza Thorne rubbed her temples, staring at the wreckage of the telegraph office. Sparks still hissed from some stubborn wires, smoke curling like lazy snakes in the morning air. The brass keys were bent, paper scorched, some messages half transmitted, half gibberish. Whitaker shuffled through the chaos, muttering under his breath, "Kid, this ain't just some flash in the pan, half the lines are toast." Eliza snorted. "Welcome to the apocalypse, old man. Hope you slept well." They walked outside, squinting at the streets. Lanterns that survived flickered weakly. People milled around, murmuring, trying to piece it all together. Some had stayed up all night staring at the sky, caught between awe and sheer terror. A few kids were laughing, throwing sticks at the still glowing sparks. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Harrington Jr. was on his roof again, notebook in hand. He'd spent the night collecting every observation he could, scribbling down sunspot positions, aurora patterns, and magnetic anomalies. He looked at London's skyline, chimneys puffing smoke, streets buzzing with horse-drawn carts and folks gawking skyward, and thought, we got lucky. The man knew it. One more storm like that and the telegraph system, hell, civilization as they knew it, could be completely fried. Neighbors peered over his shoulder. "Richard, tell us what it means," one cried. Harrington Jr. took a deep breath. "It means we're poking the sun with a stick and it's swinging back." Back in Virginia, Samuel Grant's town was buzzing with talk. Fires from malfunctioning telegraphs had burned a few barns. Wires dangled like snakes from poles, humming faintly. The mayor was pacing, flustered, scratching at his beard. "Boy, this is insane. The whole system's down. Railroads, telegraphs, nothing works." Samuel just shook his head, thinking about the night's horrors, the sky ablaze, sparks flying, the screams and awe of the townsfolk. He couldn't believe they all survived. "We dodged a bullet," he muttered. The Carrington event wasn't just an electrical nightmare. It was a global wake-up call. In Paris, artists were sketching the strange sky. In Havana, sailors whispered about angry gods and flaming clouds. News traveled, though patchy, since telegraphs were malfunctioning. The headlines were dramatic. The sky caught fire. Aurora across the globe. Scientists scrambled, trying to make sense of it all. Balfour Stewart in Edinburgh scribbled furiously in his lab, theorizing about magnetic fields and solar flares. In the U.S., Harvard professors were debating at breakfast tables, eyes wide with both fear and fascination. It was clear this wasn't a local freak show. It was global, and humanity's shiny new telegraph network had just tasted what unchecked solar fury could do. Eliza was still at the office, talking to Whitaker. "We gotta warn the others," she said. "If the sun decides to hit again, half the country could burn." Whitaker rubbed his burned forearms. "Kid, people won't listen until it happens again." Eliza sighed. "Then we better make sure we survive until it does." They set to work, checking grounding rods, rerouting surviving lines, marking dangerous terminals. The storm had left chaos, but it had also given them knowledge. Humanity always learns best the hard way. Across the continent, Samuel rode out to check the farms. Sparks still flickered faintly from fences, the soil humming softly with residual currents. Birds flew erratically, disoriented by the sudden electromagnetic shift. Livestock wandered in confusion. Children stared skyward, pointing at faint traces of the aurora still lingering in the east. Samuel's father shook his head. "I've never seen anything like it. It's like the devil himself painted the sky." Samuel just shrugged, thinking about the scientific books he'd borrowed secretly. He knew it wasn't the devil, it was the sun. And the sun had just flexed its muscles. Meanwhile, Harrington Jr. published his observations in his journal. Astronomers around Europe and America read his notes, wide-eyed. Sunspots, flares, magnetic storms, these were no longer just theories. They were real, destructive, awe-inspiring. And the name Carrington would stick, though he himself didn't get full credit until years later. The storm had sparked curiosity and fear in equal measure. Young minds were inspired. Engineers, scientists, and amateurs alike wanted to understand the sky's fury. The world had been reminded of its fragility, the thin line between ordinary life and utter chaos. Eliza, for her part, became obsessed. The telegraphs weren't just dead, they were alive in ways nobody fully understood. She began documenting every anomaly, every spark, every message the machines spat out on their own. "It's like the sun's talking to us," she whispered once, alone in the dim office. "And we better listen." Whitaker laughed nervously. "Kid, I think you're losing it." Eliza shook her head. "Nah, I'm just finally awake. We've been asleep in our little wired world. The sun just smacked us awake." By the end of the week, the initial panic faded, but the scars remained. Telegraph systems were repaired, but with a new respect for the raw, unbridled power of the cosmos. Farmers, townsfolk, and city dwellers alike recounted tales of the night the sky caught fire. It was a story passed along at dinner tables, in pubs, and along cobblestone streets. Yet despite the awe, most people quickly returned to their routines, forgetting how close they came to disaster. The sun, silent again, continued its eternal dance. But scientists, engineers, and curious souls, people like Harrington Jr., Eliza Thorne, and Samuel Grant, would never forget. They had seen the raw power of the universe, and it had left its mark. In the end, the Carrington Event of 1859 was more than a spectacular light show. It was a brutal, humbling reminder. Humanity, with all its wires and machines, was just a small player in the grand cosmic game. One misstep from the sun could fry everything. And for those who witnessed it, Eliza, Harrington Jr., Samuel, it was the night the sky caught fire, the night humans realized just how fragile their electric dreams really were. Man, by now the dust, or whatever sparks were still floating, had started to settle, but the aftermath. It was wild, chaotic, and honestly, kinda terrifying. Cities were trying to bounce back. Farms were checking fences and wires, and the telegraph offices. Don't even get me started. They were still twitching, still humming like they had a mind of their own, like the sun itself was laughing at everyone. Eliza Thorne was the first to notice the weird patterns. She'd spent days analyzing the remnants of the storm. Papers scattered, wires half burned, keys that still zapped her when she pressed them. "This ain't random," she muttered, pacing back and forth. "It's like the sun is writing its own Morse code." Whitaker, bless him, just shook his head. "Kid, you've been staring at dead wires too long. Go get some sleep." Eliza ignored him. Sleep was a luxury. She had messages from all over the East Coast, some garbled, some kinda readable. "Aurora, sky on fire, end times." One read. She scribbled her notes furiously, thinking about how close the world came to a total freakin' meltdown. Meanwhile, over in London, Harrington Jr. was feeling the heat. Scientists were buzzing, newspapers blowing up, and everyone wanted an explanation. Harrington was like, "Yo, chill. I'm trying to piece this cosmic jigsaw puzzle here." But no one was chill. The tabloids were screaming, the heavens ablaze, end of days in sight. People were flipping, some praying, some just gawking in pure awe. Harrington's attic observatory was packed. He had journals, telescopes, brass instruments, and a pile of nervous neighbors asking questions. "Richard, what's next? Another sky fire?" one asked. He scratched his head, staring at the sun through his scope. "Could be, or maybe it's just the sun being a total brat. But we need to be ready." Back in Virginia, Samuel Grant's little town was dealing with real-world consequences. Farms had wires sparking, fences still buzzing faintly, and livestock acting all kinds of confused. Samuel rode out, helping neighbors fix what they could. "Y'all seen anything like this?" he asked a farmer fixing a smoldering gate. The guy shook his head. "Boy, never in my life. Thought Judgment Day came early." Samuel just shrugged. "Nah, just Mother Nature flexin', that's all." Across the ocean in Boston, the city council was finally waking up to the reality. The telegraph system was both miracle and menace. Meetings were called, boards were convened, and engineers were running calculations like maniacs. "We need surge protections," one guy said, pacing. "We gotta insulate lines better." Eliza leaned in, scribbling notes. She was already thinking decades ahead, imagining how humans could defend against the sun's crazy moods. Whitaker laughed nervously. "Kid, you're thinking centuries ahead. Let's fix today first." Eliza smirked. "Nah, old man, today's already done. Tomorrow's what I care about." Meanwhile, news trickled in from around the world. In Paris, young artists were sketching the aurora as if it were some divine graffiti. Monet, still early in his career, was staring skyward, inspired by the colors, the chaos, the sheer scale. In Havana, sailors were still whispering about angry gods in the sky. In Melbourne, convicts paused their labor, just staring up in awe and fear. Even the native tribes up north were talking about the sky spirits, legends merging with reality. The aurora had gone global from pole to pole, and humanity had collectively lost its mind for a night. Eliza's telegraph office was becoming legendary. Operators told tales of sparks flying, machines typing on their own, messages arriving without batteries or input. It was like the sun was playing a cosmic prank and humans were just the audience. Some of the crew swore they heard ghostly whispers through the wires. Eliza just shook her head. "It's science, idiots. Pure, raw science." But deep down, even she was spooked. She'd lost her fiancé years ago to a shipwreck delivered via telegraph message. That night, some garbled transmission hit her right in the chest. "Love, eternal, sky watches." She froze, heart pounding, thinking maybe, just maybe, the universe had a weird sense of irony. Harrington Jr. and his network of amateur astronomers were pushing the envelope. Letters flew between Europe and America, notes detailing sunspot activity, coronal flares, geomagnetic anomalies. Everyone was realizing that the Carrington event wasn't just a one-off spectacle. It was a warning. And it was global. Governments started scrambling. Telegraph offices implemented grounding rods, insulated lines, and emergency protocols. Cities were forced to reckon with something bigger than them. Even the unscientific public began to accept the idea that the sun could throw a tantrum and fry their lives in a heartbeat. Back on the farms, Samuel was thinking bigger. He had helped townsfolk repair fences, grounded wires, and explained the aurora phenomenon to curious kids. The story was spreading fast. People wanted to understand, wanted to prepare. Samuel realized that while society might forget this, he wouldn't. He had seen the night the sky caught fire. He'd seen how fragile humanity's toys, telegraphs, fences, carts were in the face of the cosmos. By the time September was ending, life was slowly normalizing. Telegraphs mostly worked again, though operators were still jittery. Streets filled with horse-drawn carriages, kids went back to school and markets reopened. But the memory lingered like a faint burn in the retina. People talked about it for weeks, then months, but most eventually moved on. Eliza, Harrington Jr., and Samuel, they didn't forget. They were part of a new generation, awake to the power of the sun, aware that humanity's electric dreams could be snuffed out in a heartbeat. They began prepping, documenting, and educating anyone who would listen. The Carrington event had shown the fragility of human tech, the might of the cosmos, and the thin line between awe and terror. That night, the sky had literally caught fire, and people everywhere had stared up, mouths agape, hearts pounding. Humanity had survived, but it had been reminded, it ain't invincible. And for those who lived it, who saw the auroras and sparks firsthand, life would never look the same. They'd learned the hard way that the sun was boss, and no telegraph, no engine, no city could claim control over it. By now, the world was officially trippin'. The Carrington event wasn't just a freak light show anymore. It was straight-up chaos. Telegraphs were still spittin' sparks. Fires had broken out in a few offices, and people were losing their minds thinking Judgment Day had arrived. Social order, kinda shaky. News traveled slower than the storm itself, but stories spread like wildfire. Folks everywhere were freaked hard. Eliza Thorne was still grinding at the Boston Telegraph office. She'd been up for days, eyes bloodshot, fingers raw from typing, trying to decode incoming messages that looked like the machines had gone rogue. "This is insane," she muttered, pressing her palms against the desk. Sparks jumped from the keys as she typed. Whitaker leaned over, muttering, "Kid, you need to chill or you're gonna fry yourself." But Eliza wasn't having it. "Nah, we need to figure this out now. People are scared, and someone's gotta make sense of it." Every new message was crazier than the last. One guy in New York reported telegraph sparks burning holes through paper like some sci-fi horror. In Philadelphia, a dude got zapped so bad he thought he was gonna kick it. And in rural Virginia, Samuel Grant was still helping neighbors, grounding fences, checking iron plows glowing faintly from residual currents. His little sister Annie kept asking, "Sammy, is the world gonna end?" And he just laughed nervously. "Nah, kid, just Mother Nature messing with us." Across the Atlantic, Harrington Jr. was on fire, figuratively of course. He'd been exchanging letters with amateur astronomers in Germany, France, even Russia, trying to figure out how big this flare actually was. This ain't just local," he wrote. "This is global. Northern lights everywhere. Magnetic currents messing with everything. Total mayhem." He scribbled notes frantically, calculating timelines and sunspot activity, while his neighbors peeked through windows, whispering, "The man's lost it." But he wasn't. Harrington knew something the rest of the world didn't. This was a wake-up call. He jotted down what he saw like a scientist possessed, predicting that if humans ever relied too much on electricity, telegraphs, trains, maybe even future stuff, we'd be toast when the sun threw another tantrum. Meanwhile, the ordinary folks were straight-up trippin'. Street preachers were popping off, hollering about the end times. Some folks were praying, some were partying like it was the last night on Earth. Kids were running around laughing, thinking the sky was a freakin' carnival ride. Horses freaked out, dogs howled, and cats, well, cats did cat stuff, creeping around like the apocalypse wasn't even happening. In Boston, Eliza stepped outside to take a breath. The sky was still humming faintly, like some giant invisible instrument strumming chords. "This is nuts," she muttered. People were staring up in awe and fear, snapping up every glimpse of red, green, purple ribbons dancing across the heavens. Old-timers swore they'd never seen anything like it. Teenagers thought it was the dopest light show ever. And Eliza, she was trying to make sense of the science while dodging gawkers bumping into her. Back in Virginia, Samuel rode through the town, helping fix a telegraph line that had somehow caught fire. "Yo, this stuff is alive," he muttered under his breath. He'd learned a few tricks, grounding, spacing wires, careful handling, but some things, totally unpredictable. Folks were whispering about angels, demons, or gods sending messages. Samuel just shook his head. It's the sun, not spirits. But deep down, he couldn't deny it looked freakin' supernatural. Even the world's biggest cities weren't immune. London was chaos central. People ran to windows, streetlights flickered, and telegraph offices were smoking. Harrington Jr. had to calm a mob of neighbors who thought their entire city was burning. "It ain't fire," he yelled. "It's the atmosphere supercharged." Chill, but explaining electromagnetic plasma to panicking crowds. Not easy. Folks still ran screaming, clutching their hats and prayer books. And the tech? Man, don't even get me started. Telegraph lines everywhere were either fried or buzzing like crazy. Operators were hopping in chairs, sparks flying. Messages were coming through by themselves, some garbled, some strangely coherent, some reading like ghost notes. Aurora's sky ablaze, humanity shaken. Eliza stared at one, eyes wide. "What the hell is this even real?" Whitaker shrugged. "I dunno, kid, maybe we're talking to the sun now." Meanwhile, scientific chatter picked up. Academies in Paris, Berlin, and New York started putting heads together. They were piecing it together. Sunspots, magnetic storms, coronal mass ejections. No one had ever seen anything like it. People like Balfour Stewart started connecting dots, realizing the sun could directly impact Earth. They wrote long, fancy papers with diagrams, equations, and warnings, but the general public, still freaked out, still calling for prayers. And it wasn't just humans. Nature itself was acting up. Birds flew in strange patterns, confused by the unnatural lights. Fish jumped in rivers, startled by electromagnetic vibrations. Horses and cows behaved oddly. The aurora had painted the skies everywhere, from Jamaica to Russia, Hawaii to Australia. It was global, undeniable, and unforgettable. Samuel, Eliza, Harrington Jr. They became unofficial heroes. Samuel for helping townsfolk survive, Eliza for decoding messages and calming the office, Harrington Jr. for piecing scientific insights together. Each one realized something. Humanity wasn't ready for this. Civilization had barely begun to rely on electricity, but the Carrington event just threw a cosmic spotlight on how weak humans were against the sun's raw power. By the time the sun rose, normalcy returned, kinda. Telegraphs were repaired, fires were put out, people started whispering, "It's over for now." But the global impact lingered. Operators were nervous, engineers were redesigning, and scientists were obsessed. Eliza stared at the repaired keys, Whitaker snoring in the corner, and muttered, "If it hits harder next time, we're toast." Across the Atlantic, Harrington Jr. wrote letters warning colleagues to monitor sunspots, prepare telegraph systems, and educate the public. Samuel went back to the farm, looking at his little sister playing, still thinking about how fragile everything really was. The Carrington event had burned its mark into history. Humanity survived barely, but the warning was clear. The sun could flex whenever it wanted, and Earth's toys, telegraphs, fences, wires, were nothing but playthings in its massive hand. That night had changed the way people thought, worked, and dreamed about science forever. And those who had lived it, they weren't just witnesses. They were survivors, storytellers, and maybe, just maybe, the first humans to really understand the sun's insane power. So the night the sky went nuclear. Well, not literally, but close enough, had faded, the aurora's gone, and the world was slowly catching its breath. Streets were quiet, smoke from burned telegraphs still curling into the air, and folks were walking around like zombies who just woke up from the craziest nightmare ever. But the story, man, it wasn't done. The Carrington event had left scars, both on Earth and in the minds of everyone who'd lived through it. Eliza Thorne, still shacking off the adrenaline, sat in the Boston Telegraph office staring at her hands. Fingers raw, scorched a little from the sparks, but she was grinning like a champ. "We survived, didn't we?" she muttered. Whitaker snorted, finally waking from his nap in the corner, rubbing his eyes. "Kid, we didn't just survive, we made it look easy." But Eliza knew better. She'd seen sparks leap, fires start, and machines run wild like they had minds of their own. She wrote down everything, every little glitch, every strange message the telegraph spat out. She figured someday, maybe in a decade, maybe in a century, someone would finally understand what had happened. Across the pond, Harrington Jr. was on a mission. Letters flew back and forth between him and other amateur astronomers, scientists, and even a few brave engineers. "Yo, we got lucky this time," he wrote. "But the sun isn't done with us. Our toys, telegraphs, wires, newfangled machines, are just bait for a bigger storm next time." His handwriting was frantic, full of doodles of sunspots, magnetic lines, and diagrams of telegraph currents. He wasn't worried about fame. He just wanted people to take the sun seriously. Meanwhile, Samuel Grant in Virginia was back on his farm, still checking fences, plows, and the family's iron gate. Little Annie was running around, laughing, asking him to tell the story again. Samuel smirked. "You really want to hear how the sky tried to roast us alive?" She nodded like, "Yup, gimme the full scoop." So he told her, careful to mix fact with a little flair, making sure she'd remember the chaos, the fear, and the beauty all at once. News outlets were buzzing. Papers in Boston, New York, London, Paris, and even Havana printed headlines that screamed like they were straight out of a horror flick. "Sky on fire. AURORAS reach Southern Hemisphere. Telegraphs possessed by the sun." Journalists scrambled to understand, interview witnesses, and turn this cosmic freakout into something people could actually read without crying in their soup. Some did a bang-up job, others, well, let's just say sensationalism sold newspapers better than science. Scientists, oh man, they were losing it in the best way possible. Balfour Stewart, Carrington himself, and other nerdy geniuses across Europe and America started comparing notes. "Sunspots correlate with geomagnetic activity," they scribbled. "Massive plasma ejections, mind-blowing energy, could fry electronics of the future." They didn't have satellites yet, no modern tech to measure CME speed or magnetic flux, but they could see the patterns. They theorized, debated, and argued like crazy. And all while the public thought it was some divine light show, not a space weather warning. Eliza took her experience to the next level. She wrote manuals, trained other telegraph operators, and advocated for grounding wires, insulating machines better, and taking solar storms seriously. "If it happens again," she told the crew, "we don't want to fry anyone or burn the place down." People laughed at first. Eliza was just a woman at a desk, right? But after the sparks and fires, everyone knew she was speaking facts. She became a quiet legend in her circle, a hero no one really got to give a medal to. Samuel. He turned the whole event into a personal philosophy. "Nature's wild, kid," he told Annie. "Respect it, study it, and don't get cocky thinking we're in control." He later joined the mechanics school, becoming one of the engineers who expanded telegraph lines safely across new territories. He always carried the memory of that night, the glowing sky, the humming air, the chaos, and it guided him in building safer infrastructure. The world slowly rebuilt. Telegraphs were repaired, wires insulated, offices rebuilt, and lessons learned. People still told stories around the fireplace about the night the sky caught fire, mixing truth with embellishment. Kids dreamed of magical skies, artists painted auroras that weren't quite real, and philosophers mused about humanity's place under the sun's wild temperament. Governments and scientists began thinking ahead, how to prepare for massive solar storms in the future. No one knew it yet, but the Carrington event would eventually become a textbook example of what could happen to modern society. In an age of satellites, power grids, and electronics, it would be a warning etched into history. Ignore the sun at your own peril. And while humans survived, they also changed. People became curious, cautious, and respectful. They realized the Earth wasn't invincible, that tech was fragile, and that the cosmos, big, chaotic, unpredictable, could mess with their lives in ways no one could fully control. For Harrington, Eliza, and Samuel, the lesson was personal. Knowledge was power, preparation was life-saving, and bravery meant facing the unknown head-on. As decades passed, astronomers refined sunspot studies, geomagnetism became a field of intense research, and the Carrington event grew legendary. But the stories of those who lived it, Eliza typing in Boston, Harrington peering through telescopes, Samuel saving towns, remained unsung in the grand histories. They were the unsung heroes who saw chaos, stayed calm, and made sure humanity got another shot at surviving the sun's fury. So yeah, the night the sky caught fire wasn't just a show. It was a cosmic reminder that Earth sits under a fiery star with untamed power. It left scars, taught lessons, and sparked curiosity that would fuel science for generations. And those who lived it, they were the real MVPs, surviving, observing, and learning from a universe that can go from chill to wild in minutes. The Carrington event wasn't the end. It was a wake-up call, a blazing, unforgettable, utterly chaotic reminder that humans might have tech, but the sun's got game. And the night it caught fire, humanity wasn't ready, but we made it through. Barely.